A lot of people think it's cute, how people feel about their boys, boys will be boys. I mean, there's all these sayings and things in society that actually lean us toward excusing a lot of that behavior. Then we grow up we're dealing with the same thing. And I don't always know that parents even recognize that this is something that they need to work on, especially if they also have that trait in themselves.
Welcome to the 43rd episode of Love, Growth, and Narratives. I'm Frederick.
And I'm Tiffany.
Today we want to talk about how certain things we allow children to do in childhood that seems cute and everything, how if it's not addressed as they get older, it can actually persist into adulthood and sometimes get even worse. Do we have any housekeeping today?
No, nothing other than, hey, please continue to like and subscribe and share.
Absolutely.
Continue with that. I think we're up to 3.6 thousand followers, which is great, subscribers. And we want to continue to grow that. So please, if you find interest in this, or especially if you know someone who, this topic may help them, please share.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and jump on into the episode. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this, and I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but about 3 years ago, around the time we were really starting to get to know each other, and after work, you would kind of vent about, the way the kids were behaving. Mm-hmm. And each time I was like, wow, I know adults that do the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of started going down a road just realizing that, there's not a guarantee that these kids are going to grow out of it, especially when it's not addressed. Mm-hmm. It's really no way to even expect them to grow out of it,
right? If
it's not addressed. Mm-hmm. So what has been your experience, especially in elementary school?
I mean, after this is my 31st year of teaching, and what I notice is that the kids, I teach 7 and 8 year olds, that a lot of the behaviors are behaviors of younger students, which I've worked with younger students as well. So,
you mean they were in the students years ago? They would have been in younger students.
No, I'm saying, if you're 7 and 8, but you're making the choices and the problem solving skills of a 3-year-old.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so they're immature compared to the past. And we're blaming it on a lot of different things, COVID and on and on and on. Right. But the point is that we still need to deal with it. I mean, I know there's an idea that kids, there are stages and developmental stages and things like that kids do in certain stages, but we can't just excuse it as, this is a developmental stage and they're cute and, it'll be fine. They'll grow out of it. No, these are conversations that need to be had and lessons that need to be taught. And you may not expect them to change the way you would an adult exhibiting the same behavior, but you are constantly going along a path of teaching them, a different way of being, because a lot of these behaviors, it's hard to have conversations. Yeah. It's hard to get along with other people. Mm-hmm. They're having difficulty dealing with their emotions. Mm-hmm. And it's just destroying not only the school environment, but just the kids themselves. They're growing up to be adults with these same behaviors. It's not far-fetched. And often you'll hear parents say, I was just like that when I was, younger. And you wonder, are they this way because of nature, or are they this way because of nurture? Because the parent also
or lack thereof
may or may not have grown out of that as well. And so, and just this time that we're in of, I believe in social emotional, learning, but I also believe you got to be a little bit tough too. Everything, you're not going to be able to talk out every single thing that happens and, go to a corner and all of these different things, right? Sometimes you have to let some things just fly off of you. And I don't think that we're teaching kids to do that. That we're teaching them to make every single thing a huge traumatic event.
Yes.
And then they're growing into young adults doing the same thing. Right. So I definitely think it needs to be addressed.
But I think there's another piece that we're missing to that, and that's the positive peer pressure. Mm-hmm. Because And of course I'm going to romanticize when I was a child, but if I were 7 years old and still acting like a 5-year-old, I would hear it from the other kids. So it wasn't just about the parents and the teachers. It would be the other kids like, why are you acting like a baby? What's wrong with you?
Right.
But now it seems like since they're all acting immature,
there's a big,
there's no self-correction in there because there's no peer pressure.
Right. Everyone's kind of being babied and coddled a bit too much, where they're just having difficulty dealing with, of course there's real serious bully issues, right? But nowadays everyone's calling every single thing a bully. That you're bullying me. I mean, every little thing.
Yes.
And it becomes a big, huge thing. And it's happening with, say half the class dealing with that, instead of like, hey, you're going to have to brush it off, or you have to be the first line of defense and be like, don't call me that, or don't say that to me, or walk away, and all of this stuff, instead of like you're crushed. And then like half of your day is spent thinking about that. And then half the time when the kids when you ask them like what was even said, they don't remember. They don't remember what was said, or they don't even understand. It doesn't make sense. Like somebody today was like, he called me a Big Mac or something. I don't know. And they just like lost it, like McDonald's. I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Oh, it means I'm fat. Okay. All right. And that's what you think it means, but they didn't really say. I mean, kids are calling each other the weirdest things nowadays. They don't even have, you're like, what is that? Like, you know what I mean?
Making stuff up.
Skitty or whatever they all say. And you're like, what is that? But the kids are upset about it, right? Don't even know what it means or anything, but they're taught to be like, I got to be upset about everything that happens and talk it out for 20 minutes and take a 5-minute break.
Which has got to be crazy. And so how do you address the situation when you see that they're like 2 and 3 years behind maturity wise, not just in terms of academics, but maturity wise? How do you as a teacher address that?
I try to address it as carefully as I can, also with parents, because sometimes parents just don't know what they should be doing, you know. But also with the kids, like, half the time when you bounce something back on them and you don't try to solve it for them, they'll come up with the answer.
Yep.
So they know, right? But they've been used to this crutch that someone else is going to solve it for me. But I've also exposed them to kids, seeing kids much younger than them handle things that they are saying that they can't do. And I'm hoping that will inspire them. Like, I can do this. Wait, I'm double their age, and I can do this. Like, it's nothing major. It's, I mean, like tying shoes, right? There's so many, like I used to teach pre-K, which is now called TK in many places, but these are 4-year-olds. Right. They all left knowing how to tie their shoelaces.
Absolutely.
Now you have students who are 8 going into 3rd grade and they cannot tie their shoelaces. And
if you could imagine in the 80s, a child that was 8 years old that couldn't tie their shoes, how they would hear it from the other kids. Right.
And it was rare that that happened, right? Sometimes there are some people who don't have that fine motor skill, but now it's like most of them do, maybe not because they're just not taught or expected to. Oh, I'm going to get the shoes, the laces that kind of curl up and tie themselves, or I'm going to get the Velcro shoes. I mean, we're constantly making things so easy that the kids are having trouble, problem solving. And then they're just becoming adults. I mean, how many adults do we know that cannot problem solve some simple things, right?
And I wanted to take it back because being a parent, I see where a lot of these things start, because when you have a 2 or 3-year-old child, a lot of this stuff is cute.
Right.
And you tease them about it and you show it off to your friends about how my child does this thing and how cute it is and everything. And the problem is that either one of two things happen. Either you don't realize that by 7 years old, it's not cute anymore.
Right.
And probably wasn't cute at 5, or what ends up happening is you see it, but because you've been praising it and having fun with it for so many years, it's difficult to now jump in and say, hey, that used to be cute, but it's not anymore.
Right.
And so now we need to move on to something that's more age appropriate. And I realize that for parents, a lot of times, because, it's hard to talk to children about how they need to mature. And it seems like it's particularly hard to talk to boys about this because girls are maturing. And I don't think, I mean, a lot of it, you can say that girls naturally mature faster, but I also suspect that the parents are having higher expectations of the girls than they do of the boys. And maybe that's part of the problem.
It tends to seem that way, you know, and it could be cultural.
Yeah.
But I think in general, we, you know, allow boys, because we have that knowledge that boys maybe take a little longer to mature, we kind of excuse a lot of the behavior more. It doesn't mean that they don't still need to be taught the correct way to do things. But I think the idea is like, oh, it's a boy. Oh, it's, you know, they'll mature and, you know, all of this. And so we don't address it. A lot of people think it's cute, you know, how people feel about their boys, you know, boys will be boys. I mean, there's all these sayings and things in society that actually lean us toward excusing a lot of that behavior. But then we grow up we're dealing with the same thing. And I don't always know that parents even recognize that this is something that they need to work on, especially if they also have that a trait in themselves. So it would take self-reflection.
It does.
Too, right? If you see something in your child, you know, it's been brought to your attention by a teacher or you see it yourself or a family member or whatever, you got to stop and think, am I exhibiting that behavior? Am I teaching them to be that way through my actions? I think that's important to be able to do that. Otherwise, they're just going to keep going with it, right? Yeah. But going back to just, you know, we're expecting adults to be mature in certain things, but I mean, I guess there's just diversity amongst maturity, right?
Yeah, there is. And I, you know, one other thing about with the parents that, at least from my experience, being a parent, is that a lot of these immature behaviors, because they come on so gradually, sometimes you don't see how bad it becomes until someone points it out to you, which is why also as a parent, you have to allow information to come from other people. You know, if you've got neighbors or family and friends who say, hey, you know, little Johnny shouldn't be doing that at 7 years old, you know, to at least, you know, think about it and figure out whether you think it's appropriate or not. But too often these days, parents will just get offended. And it's like, how dare you criticize my child? But I don't think, at least for me, if it hadn't been for the criticism of others, there's no way I would have found these things this early. Or when I did, there's no way. Sometimes you need someone to say, hey, your kid shouldn't be doing that. Right. Or I noticed this behavior. So because we don't notice everything.
Right. I also think it's important for parents to have intentional parenting. You know, of course, you're not ever going to catch everything and nothing's going to be perfect. But if you are intentional about what the lessons and the things you want your child to learn, I think you're going to catch a lot less, or you won't need to catch a lot less because you were intentional about, you know, certain things that you want to see in your child. So, but I don't think a lot of people do that. It's like, I'm going to have a baby and I'm excited and cute. And then you have your baby, but then life kicks in and you're working and your relationships and all kinds of things end up happening. And so we're forgetting about that intentional parenting that still needs to take place, because while the rest of the world is worlding, you know, your child is growing up in that and they're missing certain things, you know? So I think it's important. I mean, like the basics of just teaching them to be polite. Right. I think we've.
Oh, yeah. They haven't learned that.
Right.
At all.
I think our big thing of when people go too far, like before we were having kids be too polite, like having them hug people they didn't really want to hug and say hello to strangers. And I understand all of that. That shouldn't, you know, you don't want to put your kid in an uncomfortable thing, but saying thank you, please, showing gratitude. I mean, to people you do care about and you do know, I think that the art of that is just gone. It's like, oh, they don't know. They're a kid. I don't know. It's just, I don't know what it is. But before, that was a thing. Like you learned those golden rules, you know, in kindergarten, very young. And now there's very few people who are using it. It should be a habit by now.
It should. It should. And now what's interesting is I get around adults now and they do the same thing.
Right.
You know, we talked in the previous episode about what's going on with courtesy. And a lot of this comes from childhood. And one of the things that you said that was important was as a parent, you know, because the whole, where kids catch a lot of lessons as opposed to being taught them. And when they see you doing things and exhibiting certain behaviors, and of course they want to take that on because you're the standard. And so sometimes we have to look at that and say, am I exhibiting the correct way of doing things? And sometimes you also got to sit your kids down and say, look, I know I've been doing this. I'm trying to stop, but I need for you to stop. Sometimes you have to be honest with your kids. Some parents are uncomfortable with showing any kind of weakness or vulnerability around their kids, you know, and that's one of the things that I've always tried to do is say, look, I'm definitely not perfect. And I'll tell you if something that I do isn't right. And I'm going to be working on this, which is what mature people do, and explain to them, this is what mature people do. You're never going to get it all right. You're going to have behaviors that aren't going to serve you. But what's important is that, you know, you pick up on that and you start working towards being better. You know, another thing I wanted us to kind of get into is some of the behaviors that, you know, and I'm 53 years old and I can still trace back some of my own behaviors now to probably when I was 5 years old, you know, in terms of not being very patient and stuff like that. I mean, that's something that I brought with me into adulthood and never fixed. Now I've tried to be mindful of a lot of things and I'm still working on it. But what I see in a lot of people our age is that they still have certain traits, be it the selfishness, the shyness, some of those traits that come from like being 5 years old and they were never resolved.
Right. Yeah.
You know, do you have any of those that you can trace back?
I'm sure I do. I think maybe the people pleasing, it's different now. Like before I really cared about what, you know, people thought about me. Now it's different. Before it would stop me from doing things. Now I still do what I want to do, but in the back of my mind, it's still like, I wonder what so-and-so thought about that. I wonder what, you know, and I can't stand that because it just takes up too much space in my mind, you know? So missing that piece of, I mean, I think what a lot of parents do, and they probably don't intend to create a space where the kids are like always caring what someone thinks, but it's like, well, you don't know how to do this and everyone else knows how. And you know, and look at him, look at her.
Comparison.
Yeah, whether it be a sibling, because I know there's a lot of families where that goes on.
Yeah.
And then also just friends or people at school, or, you know, sometimes, you know, parents have friends who have kids and like their kid can blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying I'm not saying don't do that at all, because you do want them to be aware. This is the possibility of what you could be doing with your life, you know, but you also don't want them to feel like, I got to be like someone else. It's just you have to always be paying attention against, you have to be intentional, you know?
But I think one of the best ways to do it is try to even it a bit, where you're saying, hey, look, this kid over here does this in a way that you should be striving for. Now, understand, this kid is no better than you because they also have this other trait that you've grown out of.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really not trying to tell them that you have to be totally like this kid, because that's not what I want, you know, but we have to make sure that we tell them that, because we love doing the whole comparison thing with the other kids around them. And for most kids, it really frustrates them. It makes them upset. It doesn't really come off the right way.
Right.
But I think if you say it in a way where you're saying that here are things that you do better than this child, but here's something where they've kind of gotten beyond you and you may want to emulate that.
Yeah. For me, the thing that I try to say a lot to the kids is that, yes, it's not about being like that person, but if that person has achieved something that you would like to achieve, you may want to talk to them about what it is. And then also just always keeping in mind, everyone has a strength and everyone has a weakness. And sometimes it's easier to see in other people like what they are, what those strengths and weaknesses are. And others, we have to kind of dig and kind of help them find their own, space. But if they understand that everyone has that and that we all can learn from each other, because I think the kids don't realize that they can learn from each other. They think I can only learn from an adult, and only an adult could tell me the right thing, right? Because it's quickly, you're not my boss. And they're just telling you like, hey, look at the board. Like that's the same thing I would say. No different, except the person is coming from. And I think even adults have a hard time sometimes listening to their peers.
Absolutely.
They have to hear it from the right person before, even though the message is the same and it's valuable to you, but you can't hear it unless it comes from a certain person. I think that's a lack of maturity right there too. So I really think that we need to listen to each other and just try to grow and be better. And when we see a piece of an area that we need of growth, like in kids, we're calling it, oh, well, they're immature or, they haven't developed in that area. But in adults, we want to say it's an area of growth. I mean, that's what it is for all of us.
It is.
An area of growth.
It is. And I think it's important what you said is that as adults, we need to model the behavior of listening to criticism. These children can't take criticism, first off, because we don't give them adequate criticism.
Right.
And then they're not going to accept it from their peers. If they don't get it from their parents, they're not going to accept it from anybody.
Right.
And so we have to model that behavior of taking criticism and then explaining to the child, well, here's what I'm going to do with that. This person said this. I agree with them. So here's what I'm going to do to fix this behavior and take them through it and help them understand because the fact that these children are so much less social. I mean, in terms of like in person, social than kids were before. Right. You're not getting that positive peer pressure, as kids are maturing and expecting each other to mature where they kind of build each other up. That's not happening. Right. And it's not happening in middle school and it's not happening in high school. Right. And probably not in college either. Right. So, and so we end up with older folks still walking around and they can't take criticism. They fall apart the smallest thing that happens. And you said it right. We've gone so far in the opposite direction that it's really going to be difficult for us to come back. But I think that, if we start doing this as communities, as we start, letting your friends know, hey, you see me going the wrong way, you better say something. Right. Yeah. You better say something. If this shirt didn't even go with these jeans, you let me walk out of the house like this? Really? Right. Really? You let me, you didn't say anything to me? Right. You're supposed to be my friend and you didn't say anything? Well, that's another thing that people don't seem to grow out of because they don't get enough practice of it, is like telling someone how they really feel about something, whether it's a piece of criticism that's only going to help that person, like it's about that person, or a piece of criticism about the way they interacted. Like the kids will, they'll come to me to want me to say the very same words that they should be saying to them because it happened to them. Yes. Right. And then we also excuse them. Like, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to call. But I'm not saying parents shouldn't still reach out to the teacher or reach out to the principal when something's going wrong. But did you also tell your child to say something to that child that's doing it? You have to teach that for yourself, right? Because we have adults who will not speak up for themselves, right? A lot of adults. They can't, or they don't, rather, not that they can't. They're afraid to, and then you have adults growing up who have never been told, hey, cut it out, stop it. And they think they have all this power because no one tells them no, because they have a little bit of a stronger personality and kind of pushy, and we don't teach kids or adults to speak up. Then, you have people dominating, and it's the same thing as in childhood as in adulthood. Like we're still going on with that. So we have to
do that work and understand that, yes, you know, we blame, like, if something happens with a kid, they're like, oh, they just got that from their parent. Yeah, we all just got everything from somebody, right?
All right, sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulties, and we're getting it together. But, you know, it's almost time for us to wrap up anyway. And, I mean, really, I think one of the final messages is you have to exhibit the behavior you want your child to. And part of that has to do with being able to accept criticism. You know, you can't really go around criticizing your child and then you're not able to accept criticism from anyone. You know, so we have to model these behaviors because these kids are not in groups that are maturing together, that are working together to mature, where they tease each other if one hasn't figured things out yet. Those days are over. They're not spending that much time physically around each other. And so that puts it more on us, you know, because now they're looking more at us than I think they did years back, because they don't have a whole lot to look at.
Yeah. I would like to add to that is that you need to model the behavior you want to see in society, because whether you have a child or not, kids are looking, you know, everything is not from your parents.
Yes.
As much as parents would like to think it is.
Yeah.
Right. So all these things are happening at school and the parents are like, what? I don't let them this. And I don't. Yeah. Because they're living in a world where a lot of things are impacting them. And you might need to have conversations with them about things that you may not be, it's not happening in your home, but it's happening outside. So I say that to say that, you know, if we all need to exhibit more mature behavior, and if that's what we want to see from everyone's watching, right? We see adults online, like, saying the nastiest things and comments and all kinds of stuff, and kids are reading that. You know.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. We have some new cameras that we're trying to get used to. My apologies. I will figure this out and do better in the next episode. The whole thing is that we need to model the behavior that we want to see from everyone else. You want children that can take criticism, you need to learn how to take criticism. Yeah. You want kids that'll advocate for themselves, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to model the behavior you want your kids to have. You can't expect their peers to move them in that direction anymore. It's not going to happen. They're gonna grow up and be adults who can't deal in the workplace, who have problems in relationships because they're not learning these lessons. And we're gonna go ahead and wrap up this episode. So for the 43rd episode of Love, Growth, and Narratives, I'm Frederick.
And I'm Tiffany.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Bye.